know that scene in Mrs. Doubtfire where he's got a cake in his fridge and he sticks his face in the cake and then he looks up and goes, "Hello!" Hello! I think about that every time I start one of these. But we're not here to talk about early 90s Robin Williams movies. We're here to talk about the difference between flexibility, mobility, and stability. I don't know why I say it like stability. Anyway, I want to talk about these because I think that with the increase of mobility becoming, or mobility exercises becoming such a big deal on social media, that they get kind of confusing. So I want to talk about them. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with flexibility. Flexibility is the ability of a muscle or muscle group to lengthen passively. An example of something being stretched passively is if you stand up and then bend over and try to touch your toes. That is your hamstring being passively stretched. It is being stretched via the force of the earth against your feet and through gravity pushing down on your upper body. If that was too many words for you, an easy way to remember flexibility is flexibility equals length. A lot of times, it is easy to look at someone, especially on social media, who is incredibly flexible and assume that they are healthy. And I say healthy not because they might be skinny, but I say healthy like actually physically healthy in their body. Flexibility does not indicate health or strength. It just means that you have long muscles. I mean, they might be healthy, but it's not an indicator. Mobility in a joint is the amount a joint can move, so the joint's range of motion, before it is restricted by other soft tissue, such as muscles, tendons, ligaments. Think soft tissue restriction, if that's helpful. Mobility requires a little bit of flexibility because you have to be able to move your muscles in order to move your bones through the joint through the entire range of motion, right? So the muscles have to be flexible, not super bendy, all kinds of like weird yoga stuff. I don't know, I just vogue. Strike the pose. Ah, shit. Okay. In order for me to bend my elbow, my triceps have to be flexible enough for this bone to get close to this bone, right? So that's where the flexibility comes into play. The muscle has to be able to actually allow the stretch so that this range of motion can happen. My elbow can be somewhat mobile because this can stretch. So yes, flexibility is important, but it's not the end all be all for mobility. They are not the same. If you need a one-word association for mobility, like we had for flexibility equals length, mobility equals movement. Hypermobility, you may have heard someone call it being double jointed, which is a misnomer. No one has two joints in the same joint. That doesn't make any sense. If someone is hypermobile, it means that the soft tissue surrounding the joint can bend beyond what is expected of the joint. Hypermobility, again, is not necessarily good. When ligaments and tendons can stretch beyond what is necessary, the joint may not be super strong because those stabilizers may be kind of just turned off, if you can stretch them that much. Those stabilizers might not be doing their job. Might. Just because you see someone that's hypermobile doesn't mean they're strong. So as a personal trainer or yoga instructor, if you see someone that's hypermobile, especially in their elbows and knees and shoulders, that doesn't mean that they are being weak. It just means that you, as a teacher, have to cue to help them engage the muscles around in case they're not already doing so. Body reading. So if flexibility is length and mobility is movement, what the hell is stability? Great question. In short, stability is the control of the movement throughout a joint. If flexibility is length and mobility is movement, stability is control. Joint stability requires proprioception, muscle strength, neuromuscular coordination, and properly functioning stabilizing muscles. And you might be like, of course, stability requires stabilizing muscles. It's in the name. We'll talk about it in a second, but it's easy to just kind of forget that you have little muscles in your body that are meant to help stabilize. So we talked about flexibility versus mobility. Let's talk about mobility versus stability. Joint mobility and joint stability are inversely correlated. And by that I mean, if a joint is super mobile, it means inherently that the joint is not stable. If a joint is super stable, it is not going to be super mobile inherently. Think about the shoulder and the elbow. The shoulder can move in all crazy types of directions, right? You've got this thing, you've got this thing, you can move it all over.
Wacky waving inflatable arm flailing tube man.
The elbow, however, goes up and down, and not even down that far. Hinge joint, ball and socket joint. Pretty sure I've talked about this before now that I'm saying it again. But mobile, not stable. Stable, not very mobile, considering in relation to one another. If a joint is more mobile, it is more prone, statistically speaking, to be injured during both athletic events and everyday life. Mobility allows you to move in a desired way. Stability allows you to resist moving in an undesired way. Okay, let's recap. Flexibility is length. Mobility is movement. Stability is control. So with that in your brain, let's talk about mobility exercises with all of that knowledge. I just went on a hunt for my phone. It's right there. In my opinion, mobility exercises, like the actual name of them, is a little bit of a misnomer because while they help you increase your range of motion, they also increase your stability. And so I feel like mobility and stability are actually combined when you're looking at mobility exercises. They do both and they are necessary for both. Not only do they help you move more efficiently, but mobility exercises will help you decrease your risk of injury during both athletic events, working out, and just normal everyday life. It helps the mobile joints become more stable, but it also helps the more stable joints become more mobile. Say that you're a runner. You run marathons all the time.
I just felt like running.
You have really tight hamstrings, but you stretch your hamstrings all the time. And you're like, well, this makes absolutely no sense. I stretch my hamstrings before and after a workout. I do it on off days and I roll my hamstrings and that they're still tight. I don't get it. If you have tight hamstrings and you're stretching all the time, you're probably lacking mobility somewhere else. When you lack mobility in a joint, you're typically that joint is trying to make up for weakness in some other place in your body. What other places that might be a little bit weaker in the body? The knees and the low back. And what sits right in between the knees and the low back? The hips. Your hips might be tightening and therefore less mobile because you might have a weakness in your low back and your knees. And when your hips get tight, your hamstrings get tight. So if you're having issues with a tight muscle group and it's not really making sense, zoom out a little bit and look at what could be more mobile. If you notice that you don't have a lot of mobility in your hips, it might be making up for another area of your body. So what started as just hamstring tightness is now weakness in the knees and low back and tight in the hips. So you have to work all of that kinetic chain together through mobility exercises to help turn on the stabilizing muscles around the weaker areas and help the tight area, the hips, become more mobile, more flexible, and more turned off. So how do you increase mobility in an area? You have to think about the 3 S's. Soft tissue release, like myofascial release, like foam rolling, stretch, and strengthen. You have to strengthen those stabilizing muscles. So if your low back is weak, you might need to actually strengthen your low belly to help protect the low back. You might need to do some more low back exercises. If you're into yoga, Cobra is a really good one for that. There's a bunch of them that you can look into. I can't spend more time on this video talking about mobility exercises, but there's a bunch of them to look into. My whole point with mobility exercises in specific instances like tight hamstrings is you have to zoom out and look at what can actually be mobile. You have to look at the joint in order to understand why the muscle is tight, because the muscle is what the joint moves, right? Rubber bands on toothpicks, that's all we are. Something else that you can do just in everyday life, we typically live very forward and backward. We live in the sagittal plane, meaning we move forward and backward a lot. So typically we have tight everything in the front and open everything in the back. So the hips are tight, hip flexors, the front of our hips are tight, and our butts are kind of open and just kind of not really turned on anymore, for example. So move in other directions that you're not used to moving into. Twist every once in a while, move side to side. I hope this made sense. I hope you feel great, and I'll see you later. Bye.